This is Growth Guide, a podcast exploring the depths of curiosity, questioning everything in the name of growth. I'm your host, Brian D'Alessandro. Jude Boudreaux is a financial planner that helps others live their lives on purpose. His approach uniquely pairs living in the present with planning for the future. He pulls from all areas such as mindfulness and positive psychology. You may have heard Jude quoted in publications such as the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Journal of Financial Planning, Money Magazine, just to name a few. As an avid traveler and family man, his oldest daughter visited 45 states by the age of 4 years old, never missing an opportunity to live life to the fullest. We'll discuss relationships to money, how to create a plan that allows you to enjoy the moment, and also how to course correct if you realize that where you're going isn't exactly where you want to be or where you want to get. We'll also cover off on how to introduce finances to kids as a learning opportunity. All right, so excited to dive into the world of financial planning with you today, Jude. Since we met, I've really appreciated your approach and philosophy on humanizing everything behind the numbers of money. Can you give us an overview of your philosophy?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to money is a tool, and it's useful in so much that it helps us live the life that we want to live. It's harmful to the extent that it doesn't. And it's easy to get caught up in feeling all sorts of other ways about money. Like there could be more, like most of us feel, or you can get to the biggie smalls problem. You know, the more money creates more problems, and there's everything in between. And it's been my experience that the clearer we are about what the life is we want to live, then easier it is to start to put the financial pieces together to support that life. You know, beyond that, it's easy to say we want to put X amount of money into Y type of investment, or we're going to pay off this debt. Well, knowing the why part makes all of the other choices that go into the money piece a little bit easier. And life is going to throw at you its things, whether it's pandemic like we've all lived through, or health challenges, or any number of things. We all are struggling to find this certainty that in large part in this world, I think, just doesn't exist. So we have to be able to figure out ways to be able to be flexible, adapt, and make it all work as well as we can.
Yeah, it makes me think of a conversation I was having with a friend recently where the realization, through the pandemic, a lot of people have gotten to move and relocate to the country or, change up their their lifestyle dramatically. And a lot of times people realize after having that that's not exactly what they wanted. And this realization clicked for me that our dreams are made in tension with our current realities. And once we lose that relationship, they might not actually feel the same. And have you experienced anything with financial goals in the same light, where once you actually get there, what you want and need has shifted? And how can we deal with that?
Yeah. Oh, certainly. I've seen that with families all the time. There's a quote, I believe it's Emerson. It's, so often men achieve goals long after the reason they sought them has passed. And I've definitely seen it where they pursued an idea of building a business or becoming a partner or creating some other financial things. They thought it would get them to a certain point. And by the time they got there, they look back and they missed the family and they missed everything else that was going on. And so sometimes I think the hardest thing in midlife is just to be aware of that and to say, like, your job right now is to don't blow it up. Like, you worked to build, to be able to have the flexibility to be with your life, to have this great partner that you get to spend time with, to have the family. Then do those things, be there and do those things and stay focused on that. Don't just drift off because you got bored or something else kind of flashed over there and looked interesting. So being able to stay focused on that can be the most challenging thing at times.
So when it comes to living in such an ever-changing world, I know that, every generation probably says this, that there's so much change. I think we've experienced a very unique acceleration of it and also unknown as far as what things are going to look like. How do you approach planning amidst that chaos?
I think the biggest thing we can do with that is to, one of my partners often says, the future is no more uncertain than the present, which I like, and I think is a really grounding, way to think about these things. That, it is The future is made up of the same stuff as today. And so we've got to find ways as much as we can to be here today and to do today and really live that, because the future is so uncertain, and raising children in a world with so many, wonderful opportunities and concerns about climate change. And my daughter is 11 and she's so excited we get to go to Glacier National Park this summer because she's afraid the glaciers will be gone in 10 years, which they might be. So what's life going to be for them in 60 or 70 years? And you just want to kind of go out and say everything's going to be okay and know that it has. And, it's crushing sometimes to feel the pressure of that and to want to do everything and to not be able to take away that risk of uncertainty. But I would, the only thing I think we can do is to circle back again to what's there that we can control. The farmer never knows that the crop is going to come up every year. All sorts of things can happen with that. But you have to go through the process of planting and doing the preparation in order to have the best chance of actually harvesting that crop later. So we do what we can to prepare. Build good habits around saving. Understand how you can adjust your budget if you need to be flexible and life throws you a curveball. Because there's going to be those. Life is largely about transitions and change. So how do you manage to stay present and be here and enjoy it so you don't just miss it worrying about everything else that could happen down the line when we know that things are going to happen?
Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of us kind of glaze over at the notion of financial planning and just looking at that for the future. How do you approach that differently depending on where people are at in their lives? If someone's just starting off, it's easy to say, all right, yeah, I'll deal with that later. If you're, further down the road, you might feel like you kind of missed the boat and it's, something that's a big hurdle to overcome. What are some of those different approaches?
Mindfulness, I think, is a huge part of that, regardless of where you're at. Often kind of will jokingly say to people when they come in the first time that, nobody ever sits down and says they've made all the right financial choices to get to this point. And yet they often still find themselves in a pretty good position. We have to be able to acknowledge that we're going to make choices that don't work out. And we're going to make choices that we wish we had made differently. And, we're big believers in allowances for kids so that you can give them safe ways to make mistakes and start to see that, I might spend money on something occasionally that I feel bad about later or wish I hadn't done. But I'll tell my daughter, like, you know what, kid, I do that too. And it's, you try to learn and get better from it, but it's not, you're never going to make all the perfect or just the right choices. So how do you walk that line and find that balance of what can you say no to in your life so that there's other money you can use it to say yes to things that are really meaningful. So, travel is probably the biggest thing that I hear from people that they want to do. And so if I tell people that you want to save more money because you want to save, there's no ring to that. But if you have a separate account and you can call it the travel fund or the Sealy Grand Canyon fund or whatever it is, it's easier every month, every week to push some money over into that and to make some choices where you're not going to spend money now, and that's for later you. But often it takes some mental reframing to get some energy around that.
So you're basically taking whatever that saving is and attaching the emotional or even physical goal to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're very much borrow energy from the future to make choices today. Because if it was, we've got to walk this line between hedonism and miserliness.
It reminds me of the marshmallow study.
Sure.
And so I'll just recap it for listeners. But the marshmallow study is, I forget how old the kids were, maybe like 6 years old or so. And they sit them down and they put a plate in front of them and they either offer them one marshmallow that they could eat now, or they tell them if they can wait, they're going to leave the room, come back, and they'll get 2 marshmallows. And an overwhelming number, I think almost all of them, end up taking the one marshmallow because waiting is so hard. And the more I get older, the more I realize is that we're all still kids in major ways. So how do we grapple with that?
Yeah. And that is so hard that it comes, and some of that is environment too. There's some interesting socioeconomic follow-up things around the marshmallow study. And, how likely do those kids know that if they did wait to have something, that it would still be there, it would still be offered? And so what kind of found lately, I think, is that, for my kids, they might know like, oh, well, if mom and dad say, well, we'll do this in a couple of weeks, they'll actually do this in a couple of weeks. But for me as a kid, it wasn't necessarily that way. And so I, if I can, I'm a spender in our family, my wife is a saver. And I think it has a lot to do with these lessons, these little lessons we learned growing up around our earliest memories around money. And not to be too much of a psychologist here, but it plays a huge role in all the way we see the world. So for me, money was about happiness. And if I had money, I could do stuff, and then that was great. And so I would borrow money and I would do whatever I could to have money. I also worked hard, but I spent it all and a little bit more. And for my wife, it was her father went through a career change, and it all worked out great. But during that time frame when she was younger, it really led this thing of, oh, our life is different and it's a little bit less stable. And so she's very much a saver and is focused on that and much more comfortable if we can be setting money aside, because it soothes that underlying kind of mental tape that she's got running there. So in the Robert Cialdini book about influence, I love the way he always talks about the tapes we have running. It's, click word, and we play this pattern. And so what's being aware of what that pattern is allows us a little bit of space to be able to decide, oh, yeah, that's what's happening, and I'm okay with that, or no, that's what's happening, and I want to choose differently.
Yeah, and recognizing sometimes, when we gain awareness of a pattern, we ask ourselves if that pattern still serves us. And if not, how do we start to rewrite that? Because that's the good thing about these patterns. They're hard to rewrite, but they can be rewritten if we focus on them.
Totally.
I think, you said not to be a psychologist, but yeah, I mean, there's a innate psychological relationship to concepts like money, to time, even to love. And we all have slightly different and sometimes grossly different definitions of them. And I think, shining a light on that is hypercritical, because it allows us to understand what it looks like and question if it's something we want to focus energy on changing.
Totally. Yeah, it's such a huge part of this. And I find with kids especially, it's interesting to see now. Money's such an abstract concept to begin with, right? I have $1 and I can exchange it for a good or a service, but the dollar is just worth it because we all believe it's worth something.
Mm-hmm.
But for my kids, they so rarely see actual money anymore. Or what do they see? They see that they used to see me pay with my credit card. Now they see me take out my phone and people give me things, or boxes show up at the house. It's not even a lot of going to the store and seeing price tags. It's a very different concept. And how do you find ways to try to make that tangible and see what lessons we want them to have about money, and how are we acting so that they see what we're doing, and that's really what they're going to get, not whatever I want to tell them, right? They're going to learn based on the choices that we make. But as we're all kind of these kids of different sizes walking around and making these choices and scratching that little neurological itch that we have one place or another.
It's a great point to look at there. And I think one part of that transaction or exchange of money that is so valuable is gratitude, the human connection with an exchange. How do we, especially in modeling for our kids and reminding ourselves, how do we not just let it be moving of numbers or bits on a computer, but actually giving gratitude for the exchange of value? And that's something that's so easy to overlook, but I think that's also something that kids pick up on right away. And you see just when they share, naturally, they give that and express that.
Yeah, and well, that just brings up so many other ideas too around, it's easy to give if you feel like things are abundant and there will be more. My son Charlie was at a party and they had a piñata and got extra lollipops. So I'm going to give some of these to my friend Hattie because she loves lollipops. And so that's great. And I can feel great as a parent when Charlie does that. It's also because Charlie knows there's probably going to be more lollipops around too. He doesn't have to worry. His life hasn't been started around this idea of well, I'm going to be worried about what's going to be here in a week or two. He feels very different about the world around him. And for those of us with our own financial stories, it's that same way. Do I feel like there's still going to be things here in the future? I'm always running scared. Or do I think that things will just happen and work to make them happen? Um, so it's endless stories around that. On the gratitude side, one of my favorite things comes from Sean Aker, who's written a couple of great books about happiness.
Yeah, I
And
love him.
yeah, one habit we've picked up that has really stuck with us is at dinner every night, we all will say three things that we're thankful for from that day. And it's been a really transformational habit for us, just so that to pause and say, like, oh yeah, I can, even if I had a rough day, I can come up with three things that I can feel grateful about. Because I think it's always, especially from a money standpoint, it's easy to see other people and feel like, oh, they have more, they're doing more, or I wish I was in that situation. And it's often we'll tell the kids, like, as much as you go and see some celebrity and see what they've got, there's a lot of people around this town that look at you and feel the same way, because you live in a nice neighborhood and you go to these nice schools. And so we've got to keep that in mind and make sure, like, yeah, like having enough is more important than having more. But being clear about what enough is super difficult to do.
And a lot of times it's a feeling more than a number. I love also in Sean's work how he talks about the interconnectedness of people. I think one of the studies he did was going on to like a train platform or at a bus stop, and he would just start getting antsy and looking at his watch and tapping his toe and getting all fidgety, and right away the people around him would start getting more antsy and their anxiety would build. And it's just this reminder that we greatly affect the people around us with our actions, our ideas and concepts. And I think this comes back to money and financial position, because we all know that when we're around people who are living in abundance, we kind of take that on and we stop feeling those constraints we might have had. And that's another, I think, good way we can kind of break out of some of our ruts, is surround ourselves with people who think differently about money and relate to it in a more positive way.
Absolutely, that's really great, and I think it's an important connection that we don't often make. But not to make this whole show about kids either, but absolutely, like your kids are constantly scanning you for emotions. So like, are things okay, or are you things going on? And they know, so we can try to pretend with our adultness that they don't, but they absolutely know what's going on with us. Having that around your friends group, around your peers, around the people you work with, it's absolutely going to be a part of the entire picture. So, what are those habits we want to bring forward? What are the things that we can do that helps put us in that right space is tremendous. And so often I'll, come across people who have lots of cash and savings accounts, and they feel like, oh, I should be doing more with this, or I should be buying X, Y, or Z with it. Well, maybe, but does that having this amount of cash help you feel comfortable and going into the world? And okay, then there's value in that too. It's not return. All return is not just some percentage that shows up on a report. There is oversaving and there is being too conservative, but there's also finding a balance in this life that is important, and making sure that you know what those parameters are. And honestly, if it's not getting in the way of you funding your other goals and living the life that you want and having more money in a savings account or in cash than you might otherwise think, then by all means, have the money in the savings account.
It brings up for me this whole notion of competition. I see there's a lot of people that, and I think it's the norm, that approach saving money and growing your money and investing as this competition. And you need to win, you need to grow as much as you can. And you usually don't even look at, who might be the losers in that. And I don't relate to that. It just doesn't resonate and it doesn't feel good for me. How can we shift that? And if you agree, if you don't agree, I'd love to hear your thoughts there. But how do we shift to a more cooperative and collaborative way of investing and growing our money that feels a little bit better for some people?
I do agree with that. I need some more time pondering on it, because it is such a big thought and an important one. And I think it's absolutely true these days, especially on, as we live in this time of social media and cryptocurrency and everything else that is, has these wild swings and these big returns. And it's easy to get caught up and say, even as a professional, I've dealt with this my entire life, and you look at the numbers and say, wow, I wish I had some of that. Right. But the thing about it is like nothing, we want to pursue this like it's a certainty, but like we're saying, other, like nothing is certain forever. Nothing just goes up, and nothing is going to be like this forever. But as we get to those latter points of what is it that I'm really investing money for? So what kinds of returns do I need over long periods of time? And then how do I want to try to pursue those returns is a huge part of this as well. Start to move more into this age of ESG investing or socially responsible investing. And we start to look at some of those things with a very different view. Like, well, maybe what if I had 0.5% less return, but I got it in a way that I feel good about or that supports my values? Or if I were able to, there's a new growing field of impact investing, of even saying we're going to put some money with a company to try to make an impact on the world, not just because we want to get some return out of it. And it's one of my biggest challenges of the whole cryptocurrency things. When we look at the environmental impact that it has from electricity consumption, it's so traumatic relative to all of the progress we've been trying to make regarding greenhouse gases and emissions that it's a question that's going to have to be answered if that becomes a sustainable part of our financial future. Because if not, it's all great if we're driving electric cars.
I've never thought about that. Yeah. And is that from the mining of coins?
Exactly. Because coin mining is so electrically intensive that some of the projections I've seen, I can send you the links for your footnotes. It's like the 46th largest country in terms of electricity consumption. It's like Austria.
And I'm sure that's expected to grow.
Sure.
Yeah, we'd love to see those links, and I'll share them out with the listeners. It's a fascinating, angle on that. And then you have things like NFTs, which, most people don't understand what they mean at all.
Sure.
I think I don't understand either,
right.
Even though I've read, a number of articles.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And as an industry, we love acronyms, right? So, the NFT world of these idea of non-fungible token, where you can have, Jack sold the first tweet he ever did, but that tweet still is out there and you can go see it. One of the best parallels I'd ever seen was if you had a picture of the Mona Lisa and somebody sold you that picture and said, we're going to put it in this file cabinet back here, and it says that you own this version of this picture. Then they said, okay, great. Well, I'd like to go take the Mona Lisa and put it somewhere. It's like, oh, no, you can't do that. Like, it's just your name is recorded here and you have this rights to this image. But what that's actually going to mean in the future, who knows? But the actual environmental impact right now is very clearly known, and it's a terrible one from an electrical standpoint.
So jumping back to, the idea of saving, saving is obviously relational to the point in time we're saving for. And I fundamentally have a huge issue with myself holding a destination mindset, that if I can get here, or once I get here, then I'll feel this, or then I can do this. It feels like, just chains to me, and it never seems to arrive. Do you see this a lot in people, and what are ways we can break out of that way of thinking?
Like, if I had X amount, I could feel free. Is that kind of where you're going with that?
Or like, people they set a target for retirement, sure, and it becomes almost this blind target that we just work towards, but we're never actually questioning in real time if that's still where we want to be, or once we get there, what happens?
Right. Yeah, I've definitely seen that for people who want to retire early, and that's great. But, so what are you going to do if you retire early? The question I often have is, are you retiring from, or are you retiring to? Is it that I can't, I feel like this job is killing me and I can't do this anymore? Or is it I can't wait to go and do X other thing? I'm a big believer in let's find the way to live the life you want to live now, more than just setting money aside for an undetermined future that hopefully you get to have, but we all know people who haven't. Blending that in is really important. And I think the one thing we think about with cash flow when we talk to families is this idea of spending is now past. You bought a house, so you have a mortgage payment. You bought a car, you have a car payment. Well, that's a decision that a past version of you made. And so you spend it this month, but that choice was already made. You have money present for gas and groceries and clothes and lifestyle things you're going to spend now. And then you have money future, which is money that you're setting aside to spend in the future. So whether it is to take a trip in 3 months or to retire in 20 years, saving, yes, but it's just future spending that we're doing right now. You're setting aside so you can spend in the future in a different way. Finding a way to balance that and not just get caught up on the chasing of a salary target or something along those lines. If you can live your life in a sustainable way, and you can work for longer, that changes everything about your retirement picture. Or can you work in a much more flexible way? I think we're going to see a lot more of that coming. Can you go and take off a long stretch that allows you to continue to work or do career breaks? There's more and more of those kinds of things we've seen, or even now I'm just going to save money and take off 6 months, and then I'm going to re-enter the world and workforce and see where things are at that point. Talk about taking a big leap of faith, but also investing in that experience for you is a tremendous, tremendous thing. I don't know that we'll see people run as far and as fast as they can, retire at 50, and then never work again. Most people I know don't work that way. You get bored, you get restless, you want to be a part of something, you want to contribute. And if your work can be that, then it creates all kinds of flexibility around what it is you want to do.
And so, how do you approach it for each individual as far as figuring out how much of their money they should keep liquid versus investing, and how much of that should be, moderate versus aggressive?
It's extremely individualized, which I think is one of the challenges on terms of looking at this as just numbers. So if it's just numbers, we all know how to use Excel. We can make some spreadsheets and figure out what the answers are. The challenges sometimes is blending all these disparate goals of I want to spend this now and I want to be able to retire and I'm worried about my kids' education and I might need to help my parents. So there's all these competing things competing for the same one definable resource in terms of dollars and cents. So finding a way to balance that is so difficult and tricky and so individualized because I can work with the same family and the same 2.3 kids and the same income or job. And everybody has a very different way of looking at how they want to go about that. So I think building a financial plan is about building a life plan. We call it financial life planning for that reason, because it's what's the life you want to live? Let's paint that picture as clearly as we possibly can. And then how do we use your financial resources to build towards that life? And everybody makes those trade-offs one way or another. My wife has stepped away from a nice income and a corporate career to be a stay-at-home parent for a stretch. And that had a lot of real financial implications for our family. But the life trade-off that it has made in terms of how much less we have in savings or in investing is, for me, has been so worth it. We can work longer. I'm glad to make that trade-off to have given our family this time. And I think the best way we can go about this is just with as enough clarity as we can get and go into those conversations and have real honest discussions about, well, if we do X, then Y is likely to happen, and are we okay with that being the case? Is your work and you just get paid for it, or is your work part of who you are? For me, it's very kind of connected to who I am, and I would have these conversations with people very gladly if I were retired, but also probably rather not retire. I'll just work longer, and yes, I'll save and set money aside for the kids and those things, but I'm going to continue working. And if I have more money to give away or more people we can mentor or more lives we can impact, then that's the goal I want to pursue. That's the kind of thing I want to do. And for me, the folks that have had the easiest time of going about this are the one where that work life is really integrated with who they are. Not everybody gets to do that, but I do feel fortunate every day that I get to do that.
Yeah, what do you say to, some of my friends that are usually like late 40s and 50s that are just sticking with a job or a career and trying to keep their eye on the finish line and kind of grinding through? What do you say there? It's always a bit heartbreaking for me to see that they're, so unhappy and churning so hard and just, their health is usually degrading. Like, what's the advice that you give in that situation?
Yeah. There's a line about you spend your health trying to pursue wealth, and then you have to spend your wealth later to try to recover your health. And it's a really unsustainable cycle, and we've all seen people I think that we know have been hurt by that. I think sometimes they need to have almost everybody needs to have that hard reset moment, because it's hard to, if you're that kind of driving person, to really be able to step back and look at your life and those things. But it almost needs to have the health scare that looked really scary, but turned out not to be such a big deal. But you've thought about it. You had a second to run the tape to the end and see, well, what do I want to, am I okay with pursuing down this line? If this is how it goes, am I going to be okay with that? Or does that give you enough momentum to make a positive change? because I think the biggest ability you need there is just to be able to step back for a few days and look at your life and say, is this really what I want to do? One of my favorite lines is to say yes to ideas and no to details. So we've always wanted to go and have a farm that grew flowers and sold to florists. Well, do you know anything about that business? I don't, but can we find a way to go and explore and see what that really means? And hold a space for that, and for that outcome to maybe be yes. And yeah, you may not make as much as you did if you were the partner at your law firm, but can you make enough? And can you live a more sustainable life that way? And those kinds of changes are much more possible than people realize. But finding a way to hold enough compassionate space to even really be able to explore it is where a thought partner comes in. And so somebody who really cares about them that can say, I'm concerned about you. This looks like it's really hard and taking its toll. Like, isn't there another way? Have you ever thought about that? What else would you do? And just be willing to listen and write notes and ask more questions and be curious is, I think, the tremendous gift that can kind of sometimes break us out of that.
Yeah, you bring up the taboo part of money, right? I mean, the fact that so many of us are so uncomfortable talking about money, whether it was from our upbringing or just there's so much loaded tension behind it. But how do we get past that? Because I feel like that it seems like it's such a bad way to be living, right, in relationship.
Sure. It is hard if you think, what are the things that are secrets in your life, and that's secrets generally because they're good things. They're secrets because they have all this other emotional stuff attached to it. So back to I think some of it comes to your idea of competition earlier. That people sometimes feel like that's a scorecard of their worth, and it's not. It's
Yeah, but
just
everyone is secretly carrying around this number, right? And then
sure,
in relationship, the goal of where they want the number to be,
right,
and then the number they think other people have. And I think that's another like toxic way that we would live, where we're just, in this competition in our own head and it doesn't even really exist.
oh, entirely. It's because it is all it's like money. It's all imaginary, but it's kind of the easiest way to kind of array things, right? You can stack it from top to bottom. You know how to line up numbers in a row and start to feel like, oh, well, that would be amazing, or something along those lines. I mean, my life is largely talking about money, so it's easier for me, I assume, than a lot of other people. But we do encourage people to just try to talk about it in simpler ways and then see how it evolves. And it doesn't mean you have to jump into the conversation of, well, how much do you make? And I would encourage you, even if thinking about how somebody who cares about you asks that question, how does that feel inside? And then what's that about? Because if this is one of your closest friends and they asked you that, you know them, you know their intentions, and they just asked you a question, but that emotional reaction you had was yours, not theirs. So where's that really coming from inside of you? What's that answer about? Because we got to find a way to divorce that from being like my measure of worth. 'Cause if it is, there's never going to be enough. And it's hard to do, but it is a tough one. And even in the financial world, I make less than I know a lot of my other friends and peers do. But I also work with a group of people that I love to work with. I had my own practice, and I could have still owned 100% of it, and I would probably be making more money now than I would since we merged with this other group. But my life is so much better, and I didn't realize how stressed I was about the running the business part of the business until I didn't have to do it anymore. And so, I had a friend ask me recently what my rent was building in New Orleans where we rent, and it's like, I don't know, I don't remember. We've got CFO. And she's on top of all those things, and she loves that, and I'm so glad she does because I can then focus on the clients and the work I want to do. I can focus on the marketing and the messaging, and I get to do more play within my world than work. And do I take less money for that? You bet. And I'll be at all the kids' things I want to be at, and we'll take time off in the summer, and I don't have to worry about the business falling apart while I'm gone. But we got to find ways for that to be okay for people too. I've seen it with physicians who like, well, what if I went to 4 days a week, then I would make so much less. And the question is, all right, well, if you're still saving a bunch of money now, and we'll save less then, but you're going to have more life. Is that okay with you? It's hard choices to make when you've been driving so long in one direction. kind of just need somebody to open the window and say, could you even consider a different idea? And then that sometimes allows enough light through to maybe that expands.
Yeah, the attachment we can get to some of these ideas or goals, it's so tricky. So we spoke a bit about kids and this kind of vague concept of money nowadays. How do you approach it? How do you educate your kids around money in this current day and age?
Yeah. Well, if I could give you a gift, would be the book "The Opposite of Spoiled" by Ron Lieber. He writes the Your Money column for the New York Times, and started out with this idea of like, well, we think we know what spoiled means. Well, like, what's the opposite of that? What's that well-adjusted or understanding money thing come from? And so many ideas out of there that we use all the time with our kids. One of the biggest ones, one thing I think is really important is the idea of an allowance. And it's for us, it's not about chores. They're chores you're expected to do, but that's part of your role as a family. So our kids unload the dishwasher, they make their school lunches, that kind of thing, and you take out the garbage at times. Like very good kid-friendly things, but they don't get extra money for doing that for two reasons. One is that everybody does stuff in this family they don't want to have to do. I don't want to cook every night, but I do that. That's part of my job. And your mom does stuff she doesn't want to have to do. But so yes, go take out the garbage and you'll be fine. And then you go on to doing whatever else you wanted to do after that. The other part of that too is you might end up with one of these kids who's a saver. And if money isn't that important to them and they get paid to do chores, they're just going to start to opt out and just say, no, I have enough. I don't need any more. And so, no, you can take out the garbage, Dad. So no, that's not the way this works for us. But with the allowance, we use it again as a teaching tool. It's a fundamental way of thinking about it. So they have it's breaking into categories: save, spend, and share. So automatically, some goes into save, which is kind of longer term saving for them. It goes into their college fund. Some goes into share, which is for donations. So if there's the school fundraiser drive for something, or they find out about a cause they want to give some money to, or we should do something about that. Well, you have some money in your share account. Should we give some to that charity? Yes, and we help them do that. And we write the check, we put it in their name, the whole bit, so that they are part of that experience. And then on the spend side, pretty liberal about that. It's their money and they can spend it on pretty much whatever they'd like to. We do get veto rights, so they can't just spend all their money on Roblox, which my son would do in an instant. But we do allow them to spend some money on that. And if we're at the store, the great gift as a parent is it takes away the, well, I want this or I want this thing. Well, what do you have we use this app called Rooster Money, and we look at, well, you have $13 in your spend right now. That's 10. You can get it if you want to, then you'll have $3 and you get to choose. And there will be, I very much remember my daughter, us doing this and coming back from a birthday party at the aquarium. And she bought a mermaid thing. And about halfway, she was kind of crying in the back seat. I was like, what's going on? And she said, well, Daddy, I don't know if I wanted to do this. Like I wanted it, but now I'm not sure. And I was like, buddy, that happens to me all the time. And society just makes it even easier now with Amazon for me to do that same thing. And then things show up and I forgot I ordered it, or like, oh, I don't know if I wanted that. So these things happen. And so let's try to learn those lessons when it's $5 and not when it's, $500 or $50,000 later. So we try very hard to make that tangible and give them that understanding. And so we talk about things pretty openly around money. They're at private schools, and we talk about that we sacrifice things so that they go to private schools. And we would have more money if we didn't. But again, this is something that was very important to us, and we were willing to spend in your education. So we'll talk to them pretty openly about what that is, about what we make, about what our house costs, those kinds of things. So again, hopefully they don't come up with that same concern or stigma about talking about money. And if we can normalize that a little bit, it, I think, can free up a lot of other things. Because again, I've seen everything. I've seen people making $500,000 who are spending $600, and I've seen people who made 50 who saved 10,000 a year. And it's, sometimes it's so astonishing when you get to look at. I get this wonderful peeks into different people's financial worlds when I get to work with them. And it's always astonishing to me to see what happens to people based on their life or their circumstance or their perception or all sorts of other things. It's there's opportunities there for us to think about it and to choose, again, for those of us who are fortunate enough to be able to choose that circumstance and learn from it and make a new step forward.
Yeah, are there any general ones or, bigger buckets that you can kind of let us in on to look out for on our paths?
I mean, fundamental life beliefs around money, I think, are spend on experiences and that stuff. We spend on travel and live in a condo. So we have a smaller space, but it helps us keep less stuff around to some degree, although it's a mess a lot of the times with kids, and sometimes it's hard living in a smaller space, but gives us the flexibility to be able to do what we want to do to travel. Um, and the things I see older clients in the 70s, 80s, and 90s talk about are that, where every summer we rent that house and the whole family comes. Those are the things they come back to and they remember. It's not often the car they had in between or anything along those lines. So it's probably the biggest thing I can say there. The financial freedom that comes with a little bit of a cushion can really be tremendous. Having a built-in way to really save for sharing on a regular basis, creating those defined buckets makes that choice easier.
And is there a general number for that? Like how many, I know it's relative to the individual or the family, so how many months of, full spending?
That it's so different for each individual, but it's 3 months to 6 months worth of your spending. If you can have that in an emergency savings account, it allows you to have the flexibility to, if the air conditioner goes out or you need to change the transmission, then you can pay for that out of your money and then you can save and pay yourself back. So it allows us to stay out of this, what can be a negative cycle of credit cards that can take a long time to break out of. So having that set aside is a big plus. And then if you look at your spending, controlling your fixed expenses makes a huge difference. Again, if we go to that past, present, and future idea, the more money I've spent in that money past bucket, whether that's on houses or student loans or cars or anything, the less I have to spend now, the less I have to save for later. So if I really want to build flexibility in my life, if I can reduce that amount of spending I've spent in the past, I have a lot more that I can spend now. I have a lot more choices that I can spend later. And sometimes that ability to choose is really all we need. And then when we have the chance to make choices, we just need to try to make those with as much awareness and wholeheartedness as we can muster during that time, knowing that we're going to make some mistakes and we should have some compassion for that too.
Yeah. Any other counterintuitive approaches to saving and, managing money?
The more you can automate it and hide it from yourself, the better, right? If you have to, money all comes into one account and you have to move it out to others. Some really disciplined people will do that, but it's often a lot easier to just say, oh, there's extra money in my account, and so I'm going to go spend X, Y, or Z. Automating that process makes a tremendous difference. So if you can have it set up from your bank account or your check where it goes right into your 401k is the easy one, but into another savings account so that it builds up that savings part or goes into a different savings account that's your giving fund. So that way, when you feel like you wish you could give more and you get the requests for something that's happening at the animal shelter or the food bank or whatever other cause that's really meaningful to you, look at your share amount and see if it's in there. If it's in there, give it and feel really good about it. Then if we can automate some of those things, we have fewer choices we have to make. And this decision fatigue thing is very real. So the more, why all those things are at the impulse at the checkout at the grocery store is because you've made a whole bunch of decisions already and you're tired. So you're less likely to make a great choice at that point. Make your thinking in advance done. Automate as much of those things as you can. And then give yourself the flexibility to make the choices you want to do when the time comes for it. So much of this idea around decision architecture and even in your house, like putting the fruit out on the counter and making that easy to get to instead of this other snacks can make a difference. How do you lock up your decision architecture from a financial standpoint? Do you carry a points credit card and spend more because you feel like, oh, I'm getting points? Like, well, great, but is that enough to make up the difference of additional things you spent?
Points is a really, really wild dynamic too. I've worked in the advertising world on a couple of different credit cards, and it's always the same. Like the way that people treat their reward points is very different than how they treat their hard-earned cash.
Absolutely.
They have this like special value attached to these points, which doesn't actually exist. But I guess the value around money doesn't exist in reality either. But have you witnessed this, and what do you think it is?
Sure. Oh, I've experienced it myself. I've got, a bunch of different awards accounts, and we track those. And we're big Marriott people, so we go out our way to stay at Marriott and use our Marriott Rewards credit card all the time. And we had wonderful experiences with it too. But I'll say the whole reason it's points and not dollars you can spend at that place is because it de-dollarizes it. It's just like casino chips. If you were throwing down $100 bills on the casino every time, or you actually had to put that quarter or that dollar into the slot machine, you would do it differently. But if it's a chip, well, to our brains, it's not money. And so for points, it's the same thing. Like we have sacrificed and traded value in terms of the credit card and our spending and choosing to use a card versus another for this nebulous exchange of points. But I would also say, like my American Airlines points, which United is primarily who I fly, but I have this chunk set aside for American. They fly direct from Chicago to Japan, and Japan has been my dream trip. And so that is my Japan miles. So like once it gets tied to some specific thing, well, now like it's got all this other value, right? It's not just 200,000 American Airlines points. It's Japan. It's this dream of going to Japan I've had since I was 15.
Yeah, do you think most people set goals to their miles?
I don't know. I think they accumulate them in a lot of ways to with the idea that they'll use them for something special in the future. But I don't know that many people have a real tangible and specific one.
It's just a wild one.
Sure.
Just how we relate to it so differently. It's like monopoly money.
No, but it's also why I think you see so many of those offers out there now too. Companies have figured out like people are willing to go out of their way and do these things to accumulate these nebulous points and things. So it's another sweetener for us that we get a little hit of, little brain drug while I'm doing this and know that, I'll get my state balance, but look, I earned all these points this time too.
Yeah, that's where all the psychology of money really comes into play, and it's real. But another notion you were talking about was just charity and giving, which I think is look, this exists in so many cultures and traditions where you give a percentage of what you earn back to your community or elsewhere. But I think it also is a great way to kind of counterbalance the ego's ability to latch on to this number or the money and the internal value we might ascribe to it.
Sure.
Whereas giving is in a lot of ways the opposite.
Yeah, I think for most of us it really is. It's easy to kind of look at some other places where it's different, where you can see like, oh well, they did that for its status or other things, or to be able to say that they could do it. But there is, I think for a lot of us, it's because we really believe in something. And so what do you believe in is probably like, the fundamental question of life. And that's not, setting inside the religious part of that can easily come into this. But you believe in giving opportunities for those to, kind of walk that same path and giving back to your university for that, or give to schools so they can help underprivileged kids, or give to the women's shelter so that families who grew up with abuse like you might have can have a different circumstance. So many of these stories that come through that can, totally shift the way that it was. But again, like that part of if we get back to the psychological side, we get more emotionally from that giving than we would emotionally from that same amount of spending. And so there is always, I think, no matter how hard we try to get away from ourselves and be very magnanimous about that, I think there is always a part of us that is, our desires are creeping into this one way or another. And we get our reward from that giving too. Making it feel like we're good people and we've made this thing, and we get a tax deduction. So those are all like wonderful, nice things. But it's like being mindful about it, being clear about it is the bigger part of the whole clue. It's key to, I think, most of us. This was great. It's always great to chat with you, Brian. I've so glad you're here in New Orleans, and glad you'll like to explore around a bit and can enjoy some of the South in the springtime and smell the jasmine on the air while you're walking around town because it's
Yeah,
a
it's an
good time to be
amazing
here.
time to be in New Orleans. My first time being here this time of year, and I'm grateful. I'm so glad we can meet up.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Jude, for talking with me today and for everything you do out there.
Oh, sure. My pleasure, Brian. Thanks for coming. This is great.
Thanks for joining us this week on Growth Guide. A big thanks to our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by Project New You. I'm a huge fan of their Nitrovite nootropic brain supplement. It's helped me to develop laser focus, a better memory recall, and motivation. Nitrovite has helped me in launching this podcast amongst completing many other projects. Visit growthguide.love/focus to learn more and use promo code GROWTH for 15% off. This episode is also sponsored by the upcoming film Thrive 2. This is what it takes. A follow-up to the 2011 hit Thrive, which is one of the most widely viewed documentaries in history with over 90 million views. If creating a better world matters to you, don't miss it. Visit growthguide.love/thrive. Make sure to visit our website, growthguide.love, where you can find freebies, exclusive content, and subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. If you found value in listening, I'd really appreciate a rating on iTunes. I can't tell you just how important this is. Or spread the love. Tell your friends, your fam, heck, tell your spirit animals. And follow me on Instagram at growthguide.love. Be sure to tune in next week for our newest episode.